Welcome to the second factoring video for Chapter 5. In the first video, we reviewed factoring. Today's video, we're going to review solving by factoring. So we will be solving quadratic equations that have an x squared. This should be something that you did in geometry and in algebra. We're going to start with the zero product property. If you have two numbers, a and b, and their product is 0, so when you multiply them, you get 0. What can be said about the two numbers? Now be careful here. I have two numbers, I multiply them, and I get 0. What does that mean? Well, it means that a is equal to 0 or b is equal to 0. They don't both have to be 0, right? If you take 5 and multiply it by 0, you're still going to get 0. So in this case, one of the two numbers, at least, will be 0. Now, that should help us with this example 1. It said solve this equation. Okay, well in this case, we can think of this as one number and this as the other number. When you multiply them to get 0, it means the first number had to equal 0, or that second number has to equal 0. If I solve both of these, I get x equals 3 and x equals negative 5. So either of these will make the equation true. So x can be any value at once, but when x is 3 or negative 5, this equation will be true. Okay, so that was a review of the zero product property. Here's what's most important. It's the zero product, which means your equation has to be set equal to 0. So equation has to be set equal to 0 in order to use this. So we're going to look at a whole bunch of different examples. Okay, this first example in the upper left. First thing I'm going to notice is that my equation is set equal to 0, so that's good. Now, I need to factor this. First step in factoring always is looking for a GCF. Always look for a GCF. In this case, out of 35 and 15, I can take out a 5. I also notice that both terms have an x I can take out. 35 dividing that 5 out gives me a 7x. 15x dividing out 5x gives me 3. Okay, so again, we have our two numbers, or two expressions. So in this case, 5x is equal to 0, or 7x minus 3 is equal to 0. If I divide by 5, I get x equals 0. If I add 3, I get 7x equals 3. So x is equal to 3 over 7. So both of these values will make the equation true. Now, one thing I want to remind you of, please remember, or please note, you know you're going to have two answers because it's an x squared. So that 2 as the exponent tells us we should get two answers. If we look to the problem to the right, again, x squared tells us we're going to have two answers. We want to solve this by factoring. So again, it's the zero product property. We have to be equal to 0. If I move that 36 over, now I'm equal to 0. Now I'm ready to factor. So we should notice this is a perfect square. X squared is x times x. 36 is 6 times 6. 1 is positive and 1 is negative. Now remember from the first video, difference of squares only works when it's a difference, when there's subtraction. So now again, one of these two expressions has to be equal to 0. When I multiply them and I get 0, that's the only way that'll happen. So I have either x plus 6 equals 0, or x minus 6 is equal to 0. Solving the first equation, I get negative 6. Solving the second equation, I get positive 6. This third example you're going to do on your own. I would like to remind you this is a product sum. You're looking for two numbers whose product is 32, so who multiply to 32, and whose sum is negative 12. Add to negative 12. So pause the video, try this one on your own, and come back when you are ready. Okay, when you turn these notes in, I'm going to be looking to make sure that that problem is done. We're going to move on to the fourth problem, do this one together, and then move on. So again, we need to be set equal to 0. First thing I'm going to do is subtract that 1. Okay, now I'm ready to factor. So first thing I got to ask myself, is there a GCF? Is there anything I can take out of all 3 terms? In this case, no. Because of this 4, I'm going to have to split the middle. So I'm looking for 2 numbers that multiply to -4 and add to 3. So I have -2 and +2, which is not going to work. I have -4 and +1, which is not going to work. I have 4 and -1, which does add to 3. So again, don't miss this step. We are splitting the middle. That tells us what to do. This middle term is split into 2. It's going to be 4x minus 1x. Bring down the first term, bring down the last term. Out of the left side, I can factor out a 4x, and I'm left with x plus 1. Don't forget that plus 1. Out of the right side, I take out a -1, and I'm left with x plus 1 again. Remember, those parentheses should match, so that looks good. My first factor is x plus 1, and then my second one is 4x minus 1. Now remember, you're not finished. You still need to set both of those equal to 0. We are still solving. In this case, we get x equals -1 or 1/4. So again, those are the only 2 values that will make this equation true. Now, how did we know we should have gotten 2 answers? Well, we had an x squared. Now, that being said, sometimes your 2 answers will be the same. So you should get 2 answers. They could be the same, though. Now, one thing to caution you about before we move on, please know the difference between solving and factoring. So in the first video, we didn't have an equation. We didn't have an equal to 0. So we didn't need to go any further. Please be careful with that. Pay attention to whether or not the equation has an equal sign in it. Okay, so let's flip the page and move on to our next example. So we have a word problem to do. Given a rectangle with an area of 96 square feet, the length is x plus 2 and the width is x minus 2. Find the dimensions. Okay, before we jump in to start writing equations, let's draw ourselves a picture. So if we draw ourselves a picture, we have an area of 96. The length is x plus 2, and the width is x minus 2. Now, I do not want guess and check. Please do not guess and check to find x. Instead, we're going to set up an equation. For a rectangle, area is length times width. So if we take our length and multiply by our width, we should get 96. Now, at some point, or at this point, what some people want to do is set those 2 equal to 96. They do x plus 2 equals 96, x minus 2 equals 96. You can't do that. The zero product property tells us that this number has to be 0. So we got to move that 96 over. Before we do that, I'm going to multiply on the left side here. So again, I like the box. Some of you like to FOIL. I get x squared, 2x, -2x, and -4. What's really nice is the -2x and the +2x cancel each other out. So I get x squared minus 4 equals 96. Subtracting that 96 over, I get x squared minus 100 equals 0. So -4, -96 gives me the -100. Now I'm ready to factor. This is a difference of squares. X squared and 100 are perfect squares, and we're subtracting. So we have an x and an x, 10 and a 10, 1 positive, 1 negative. So we get x equals -10 or x equals +10. Let's start with this -10 first. If I plug -10 into the length, I'm going to get -10 plus 2, which is -8. That obviously doesn't make sense. We can't have a length of -8. So we're not going to use that value. We'll use +10 instead. 10 plus 2 will give me 12. 10 minus 2 will give me 8. So we can say that this rectangle is 12 feet by 8 feet. Please make sure for word problems that you answer the question. This question told us to find the dimensions. So sometimes you'll just be asked for x, sometimes you'll need to find the dimensions. Okay, we're almost done. Last thing I need us to know how to do from this section is to write an equation. So working backwards. If I give you the solutions, you need to write the equation. So it says write a quadratic equation in standard form with 2 and 5 as its roots. Okay, so I know that x equals 2 or x equals 5. If I subtract that 2 over, I get x minus 2 equals 0. Likewise, x minus 5 equals 0. So these are my two roots then, or my two factors really. My equation then is x minus 2, x minus 5 equals 0. This is not standard form though. Standard form is when you have multiplied out. So that's what I'm going to do. I have x minus 2, x minus 5. Again, if you want to FOIL, that's fine. This gives me x squared, negative 2x, negative 5x, and positive 10. If I combine the negative 2x and then the negative 5x, I get negative 7x plus 10 equals 0. And that's my answer. You have to remember the equal 0. That's what a lot of students tend to forget. Okay, we are down to your last problem to try. So it says write a quadratic equation in standard form with 3 and negative 4 as its roots. So to give you a hint, with that 3, start out with x equals 3. Likewise, start out with x equals negative 4. And you're going to follow the same process we did in the previous problem. When you turn these notes in, I will make sure you have this problem done. If you have any questions, please write them down.